Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the next episode of the Russell Hobbs Show, and we're so glad to have you today. I'm very thankful, grateful, and excited about our guest in the studio today. Ron Hall is here with us today.
Hello, how are you, Russell?
I'm doing great, man.
Great.
Good to see you.
I've been missing you.
Well, thank you. You're so nice. Now I know you're from Fort Worth.
Fort Worth. Yeah.
Fort Worth, and it's such a cool town. I don't get over there very often, but Fort Worth is, I believe, the coolest city in Texas, and that means America and probably the world now.
Wow.
Because Fort Worth has stuck to its identity. You know it?
You know, and I ran from that identity. I used to think Fort Worth was so backwards and provincial and all that kind of stuff in the late 70s and 80s when I was living there and began raising a family, and I was looking for something a lot more exciting, and I wanted to move to New York City, where I was doing most of my art business. And in fact, I had gone up and selected an apartment and came home to tell my wife, Debbie, at the time that we were going to be moving to New York. And she said, what did you just think? You may be moving to New York, but I'm not moving to New York. Me and my kids, we're going to be staying right here in Fort Worth.
Oh, no.
But a few years later, we compromised and moved to the far east of Dallas, Texas.
That's a compromise. Fort Worth to Dallas on the way to New York. Well, you know, women say they want a man that'll take charge, but I don't know if that's necessarily true.
Yeah, but Fort Worth, to acknowledge exactly what you just said, has become one of the coolest places. And now I love to go. Whenever I have friends in from out of town, I take them to Fort Worth. It's just more authentic, and it's historical. It's beautiful. It's got great museums. It's got the old Wild West North Side. It's got Joe T. Garcia's.
I know the stockyards is super cool. Well, you know, I didn't premeditate talking about Fort Worth, but I grew up here. I'm from Dallas, and Dallas used to be a really cool city. I remember, you know, getting on we were on Central Expressway riding with my dad. And I look over and Don Meredith's getting on the ramp in his convertible, you know, driving. And Dallas had this really cool, small town. Everybody knew each other. There were some really cool, wealthy families in the oil business and all this stuff. And I think that identity's kind of been just run over by Dallas becoming a global city.
Yeah.
And much of the history's been lost and all, but Fort Worth, I think, has preserved its identity as this very special Texas big city, you know, and it's just got a cool culture about it.
Oh, it's very cool. And in fact, when I take people from all over the world there, and they say, why don't we go to Dallas? I said, there's really nothing to see in Dallas. It's just all like any other city in America. But I live here and like living here, but it doesn't have a unique personality like Fort Worth.
I mean, I think there's still some pockets of Dallas that are cool, but I agree. Fort Worth has the stockyards, the Sundance Square, the Jazz Club underground, you know, the new area out there on the river. I don't even remember what they call it right now, but it's just so eclectic and cool. And Fort Worth's awesome. So Dallas, while we're on that, we've got Deep Ellum, which has always been sort of a culturally edgy place historically. And it's a little touristy now, you know, but it's still kind of a place maybe to look around. And then you've got, you know, great areas to live in Dallas. But you know, where would you really take people to see anything besides the JFK Museum, you know?
Yeah, which I was standing on the corner of that museum. I was standing on the corner there of Houston and Elm. The day he was shot, I witnessed the whole thing, and I was one of the last people ever to wave to JFK and his wife. So it was just as they passed right in front of me. But JFK and Jackie were all, you know, waving, and then they turned left, and 10 seconds later he was dead. So,
wow, that's amazing. You were right there.
I was there.
I remember I was at Snyder Plaza shopping. My mom, we came out of a store and got in the car and turned the radio on, and they announced, you know, what happened to JFK right there. So everybody knows where they were that moment. But you were right there. Well, Ron, why didn't you stop that from happening?
I wish I could have. Actually, my car, I didn't even know he was going to be coming through that day. I was a freshman at East Texas State in Commerce, and we had a date with some rich sorority girls at TCU. In fact, we thought, at East Texas, it was just kind of a country school. We thought all the rich girls were at TCU or SMU. And so we were heading there, and a policeman stopped us right as we got to that corner and said, "What's up?" And he said, "No, the president is getting ready to come through, and he's going to be passing in front of where your car is and turning left." And so we said, "Oh, cool, we get to see the president." So we got out and sat on the hood of the car, waited for the president to come by, and about 5 minutes later, the president passed. We waved, we jumped in the car, and we were ready to head to TCU for our dates. And all of a sudden we hear on the radio, the president's been shot. We could see his motorcade right in front of us. So we just started following the motorcade. We went into Parkland Hospital, and we just stayed in the parking lot. We were right by the limousine. There was nobody guarding it. It was just a very surreal experience. But we just sat in the car and listened on the radio. And after, 30 minutes maybe, what was probably a Secret Service or FBI guy came out and said, "What are you boys doing out here?" I said, "Well, we're waiting to see the president when he comes out." And he said, "No, the president's not coming out. Y'all get on out of here."
Oh.
But nobody interviewed us or anything like that. It was crazy. But also, I'm writing a book about all of that because I've spent now 50 years researching. I have my own theories about these things. So that's one of my new books that I'm writing, and it's fun.
That's an amazing project. You take me to a moment there. You actually had a deep JFK experience that day.
Yes.
And it also makes me think about, when you're young and you're running around living your life, you're going to see some girls in Fort Worth and all that stuff. We weren't paying attention to politics and stuff all the time. Nobody knew. Your typical Dallasite probably didn't know JFK was coming. Some people did. Obviously, they showed up for the parade or whatever, but
not teenagers anyway.
Exactly. When you're young, you're living your life and you're not worried about all that stuff. I think nowadays, though, we're just bombarded with so much information to worry about all the time, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we want to hear more about the book. So my show, basically what we do, we have interesting people in arts and entertainment, and we find out more about who they are and such. So, you and I, we kind of hit the ground running on some really deep, awesome subjects. But let's go back just to who is Ron Hall a little bit. Where'd you grow up, and who were you like in school? What were you like as a kid?
Well, as I was born on my grandfather's ranch, and my grandmother delivered me. My father was fighting the war in the Philippines during World War II. And so the night that I was born, the doctor from that community was fighting a fire at my grandfather's barn on another place that where he farmed, and so there was no doctors available, no telephones back then. There was no electricity, there was no plumbing. I grew up in those.
And here you are looking like this dapper 50-year-old. So
yeah, well,
go ahead.
76 years old. So I was born in 1945. And, we didn't have indoor plumbing on that. We moved we moved into Fort Worth to where I could begin school in 1950. But I grew up on a farm and ranch and learned from the best. My grandfather was a cowboy, and my father was in the Army, so he was away and not really was not really a part of our lives until he got home from fighting the war.
So when you say you moved to Fort Worth to go to school, what level of school are you talking about?
To first grade.
Okay.
Yeah, I started the first grade at 5 years old.
Okay. So you went to school in Fort Worth. So who was let's go to high school. Mm-hmm. And there's Ron Hall walking down the hall at high school. Who was Ronnie Ray Hall?
Ronnie Ray Hall. Yeah, that's who I was. So actually, I grew up in a little one-bedroom house in Riverside near the sewer plant, and we didn't have indoor plumbing there either. But when I was in the second grade, my father got a job and a pay raise, and so we moved to Haltom City. And went to Birdville Elementary School.
Got a toilet.
Oh yeah. And so anyway, I ended up graduating from Haltom High School, and then ended up going to TCU. I went to East Texas my freshman year, and then I heard all the rich girls were at TCU, and we had been dating a few of those, as I said earlier. So I decided to transfer to TCU, where I could hopefully marry a rich girl, because I didn't feel like that, I'd come from such a poor family. I didn't feel like I could ever make money on my own. I didn't know how I was going to do it. And so I figured if I married a rich girl, then I wouldn't have to worry about it. So that was what I majored in, dating rich girls.
That's quite a confession, Ron. I have to admit. Okay, so one more time though, who were you walking down the hall of high school? What were you like?
Oh, I don't know. I was on the rodeo team.
Okay.
So I didn't play other sports. I was in high school. I was smaller than I am now. I was like even a freshman in high school. I was about 5 feet tall. And so I got all of my growth my junior and senior year in high school, and I grew to 5'11", which is what I am now. But so I wasn't really, even though I played Little League baseball, I was still kind of a cowboy, and I liked being on the rodeo team. And actually, I'd boxed in the Golden Gloves, only because my girlfriend said, it makes me nervous to see you out there crawling on those bulls and those horses in the rodeo. And, full of testosterone. I said, well, it's either rodeo or bull riding or boxing. And she said, well, I'd rather see you box. I thought, oh, man, I don't want to box. But I had just seen this sign that the Golden Gloves tournament was coming up in about 2 weeks. And so I said I signed up to box to impress my girlfriend. One of the worst decisions I've ever made.
Wow. Yeah, those, the bulls and the Broncos is one thing, but the boxing, man, those guys are trying to hit you.
Yeah. And the bulls, I would just turn loose and jump off, right. If I got scared. But in a boxing ring, there's just no getting away from that. So
how'd the boxing go?
Well, the first round, I kicked his butt.
Okay.
Because I was like a windmill. I didn't let up. But by the second round, I didn't have any power left. So I just kind of started just running around the rings so he would try to catch me.
Man, boxing. I have my memory of boxing, like middle school. We got boxing gloves in the gym class, because I played football up until about 7th or 8th. It got too serious. So I got into soccer, which was not school oriented in middle school. So we boxed one time, and they put me and my best friend on these big old gloves, and we didn't know anything about boxing. There was no defense. Boy, we just started punching each other.
That's it, yeah.
It's so ironic that amateur boxers just knock each other out, and the good guys know how to guard and protect, right? But we didn't have any technique. But that memory just flashed back, man. My head hurt for a week. That was probably the beginning of my head hurting, for the whatever. So you were boxing, you're a rodeo guy, pretty tough, scrappy young man.
Did a little drag racing.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a hot rod, and would go out to Green Valley Raceway on Sunday and pay $10, $15 and run down the drag strips. So.
Awesome. Did you ever go to Yellow Belly drag strip?
I went to Yellow Belly. I went to all those. Yeah.
Yeah, my dad took us to Green Valley Raceway, Yellow Belly drag strip. It was fun times. I remember the drag strip up in Louisville, which is right off 35, which is where Angus ended up doing the Louisville Pop Festival.
Oh yeah.
But we saw a drag race in there one time, and they had the Green Hornet, a jet dragster. And it was a tragic experience. Another flashback here, sorry. But they had a news journalist ride in the Green Hornet right there. And I was sitting there live. The drag races are intense because you're in the grandstands. And back then, you were like right there. There was no security. And they're just these monster machines, or rah, 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 And that jet took off and blew up on the drag strip. And it was fatal, right?
Wow.
For the news person and the driver and everything. I was like, life's weird, man. This is some weird spectacle, Okay, so you were into some pretty scrappy, edgy, fun stuff as a kid.
Oh, I did a lot of fun things like that. And at TCU, I mean, I was majoring in fraternities and rich girls, and my grade point wasn't too good, so I got drafted into the Army. And that was a fun experience. It was my senior year in college, and all of a sudden they knock on my apartment door one morning and serve me with a letter that you have been drafted into the Army. And so a month later, I was in Fort Polk, Louisiana, no longer a college student, and then a buck-ass private, as low as you can get in the Army. And I spent 2 years in the Army. It was actually a great experience that made me appreciate education. And when I got out and through the GI Bill, I came back and finished college and got an MBA in finance from TCU. So then started a business career as a municipal bond trader, which lasted about 3 or 4 years. And I decided I wanted to be an art dealer. So I just
wait. You're rolling good here. But so wait, the guy that was trying to date the rich chicks gets an MBA, and you're working as a bond trader. Mm-hmm. So it turned out you knew how to make a buck on your own after all.
Well, being a bond trader back then, they paid $650 a month. With an MBA, I was making $650 a month trading, and I had a $5 million trading account. And the first year I was with the bank in my trading account, I made a $780,000 profit in my trading account trading $5 million. That was in 1970. So it was it was not a lot of. I mean, it was a decent salary. Is what people. That's salary everybody made. Yeah. But, I had greater ambitions. And so I met an art dealer while I was buying some bonds in Houston one time. I was at the Houston City Hall, and we were bidding on some bonds, and I had some time to kill before that. So I happened into an art gallery, and I met an art dealer and spent a couple hours talking to him. And he traveled the world and made millions. And I said, how do I get a job like that? He said, you don't get a job like this. You just have to do it. And so
going to have to risk some of that
before that
money.
Day was over, he sold me a painting for $3,500. I wrote a hot check for it because he convinced me that I was going to make a lot of money on this painting. Well, a lot of money to me would have been a couple $1,000s because I was making $650 a month. And but I had to go back. He told me, I said, well, I don't have $3,500 to buy the painting with. That's half my annual salary. And he said, well, aren't you an officer of the bank? I said, yeah, I'm a low-level officer. He said, I'll bet you have a $5,000 line of credit. I'll bet you that. And he said, if you get back to your bank and they won't cover your check with a line of credit, then you just bring the painting back next time you're in Houston. I said, okay. So I wrote the hot check, and that's how I ended up in the art business. I sold it 90 days later, and I've written a book about that. In fact, I'm in conversations now about making that into a film. It's called, I've had a number of names for it, but we call it For Art's Sake, and it's about art, the game of art, and playing as an art dealer. And I subtitled it The Poopsie Chronicles because my biggest client and the guy that taught me the business always called me Poopsie. And so it's, but that first painting, I after about, 2 months, and I hadn't sold it, and I was getting very nervous because I had a 90-day note. Nothing makes time pass faster than a 90-day note. And so here I had signed a 90-day note, and I had to pay it back. And the banker that loaned it to me at my bank said, if you don't pay it off in 90 days, there's going to be 2 jobs at risk, yours and mine, because I should not be loaning you this money because we don't take art as collateral. And so I got nervous, and I called the guy I bought the painting from in Houston. I called him Faux French Frank because he thought he was French, but he was actually just a Texan who liked to speak like a Frenchman. And he dealt in a lot of French paintings. So I said, hey, Frank, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm about to lose my job because I can't sell the painting. And he told me, he said, have you tried the Wall Street Journal, the classified ad section. I said, no, I haven't tried that. He said, well, take out just a little ad in the classified ad section of the Wall Street Journal. It cost me about $5. So I took an ad out, and I got one phone call from a man in Austin, Texas, and said, hey, son, I think I might want to buy your painting. He said, I was asking $6,500 for it. He said, I think you're asking too much for it, though. And I said, well, he said, we want you bring it down to Austin and let me take a look at it, and if I like it, I'll buy it. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I can't bring it down to Austin because I'm working, and I can't get off to come down there. And I said, I've got a note on the painting, and it's due here in a few days. I got to sell it here. And he said, no. He said, just put it in a box and put it on the Greyhound bus, and I'll pick it up at the bus station if I like it. I did. So I put this painting in a cardboard box and stick it in the luggage compartment of a Greyhound bus heading to Austin.
To a guy you've never met.
To a guy I'd never met.
And no deposit.
And
no Venmo.
And no Venmo. and no insurance. I didn't have any insurance on the painting. It just, my wife, I was newlywed at the time, and she was about to divorce me just over this one deal. So anyway, he gets the painting, and he said, I like your painting, son. He said, but he said, I'm not going to pay you $6,500. I said, well, what will you pay? And he said, $5,500. And I thought, bingo, I just made $2,000. So he paid me, and with like 2 or 3 days to spare, I paid off my 90-day note. And but then all of a sudden, I started seeing myself in the mirror, not as a bond trader anymore, but as an art dealer. So I kept, in fact, what I did with that money, the $2,000, is I went to, it was a jewelry store in Fort Worth, I forget the name, Edison's Jewelry. It was a wholesale discount jewelry place. And I bought my wife a new Piaget gold watch, and then I went to Coslow's and bought her a mink coat, all for $2,000 in 1971 is when that was. And so I got her off my back, and then I went back and borrowed that money again and started flipping art. And within about 3 years, I was making more selling art on the side than the chairman of the board of the bank that I worked for. And so I
Ladies and gentlemen, what you just heard was a brief story of the life of an entrepreneur. It's all about risk, and you had the vision of what you wanted to do. So that's beautiful that it turned out well.
Well, it did. In fact, the last year I was at the bank, I'd been at the bank, this was my 4th year at the bank, and it was 1974. And the chairman of the board of the bank was making $275,000 a year. And that year, as trading paintings on the side, I made $280,000. And so I went in to give my resignation, and he said, why are you quitting? I mean, you're like now a vice president, junior vice president of the bank. And he said, I said, yeah, but I'm making $12,000 a year. And he said, okay, we'll give you a raise to $15,000 if you'll stay. And I said, I hate to say this, but I made more than you did last year on my sideline. And he said, all right, good luck, and you will always have a job here. If you want to come back anytime, you're welcome to come back. So obviously I didn't look back, and I went on to a very successful art career that I traveled the world with my buddy Faux French Frank. He took me to Paris and showed me the rounds, and then I met a big client in Japan, and he took me all over Japan and introduced me to the museums and art dealers there. But I traveled the world and sold a lot of great masterpieces to museums and important collectors and movie stars, and that was fun.
So let me ask you a simple, in the 80s I had an art gallery, but it was a different world. My whole art gallery dealer experiences with discovering these really avant-garde, edgy new artists coming up. So let me ask you, where was your source for obtaining the art, and who were your clientele in a simple way?
Well, I was not representing artists because the paintings that I had sold that made the money were by dead artists. And I tried briefly to represent a couple of young artists, but I realized that, you have to be their doctor, their lawyer, their Indian chief, their mother. You have to be everything to these people, and you got to be willing to do that. And there's no money in it. I mean, if their paintings sell for $10,000, you might make $4,000 or something on it. And but I could sell, another artist, a dead artist, and sell it for $50, $20, or $30, or $40, $50,000, and you'd make $20,000, and you didn't have to, pay their electric bill that month or buy them new canvases. You didn't have to make their car payments. Artists, young artists, were always starving artists, and that's it's like playing the lottery to pick an artist and then try to take them to a successful career. And so I just chose to do it another way. But my sources were, as you are growing in the business and you're selling things, people say, hey, my aunt has a painting over here that she's got to sell. And my, so-and-so wants to sell a painting, or so-and-so wants to buy a painting. And it's just following those leads. And but I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and a lady that I met there, I walked in her gallery, and she was closing the gallery. She was retiring from the business, but we hit it off. And so she gave me a name, just scribbled on a napkin. She says, here's a man named Will Crowfoot in San Juan, Puerto Rico, has a Charlie Russell watercolor he wants to sell. And she said, I don't have the money to buy it or want it. I'm retiring from the business. So she gave me a phone number of a guy in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I'm in Santa Fe, but I'm still actually at the bank. And so I called him, and he had this painting that he had inherited from his family. His parents were from Great Falls, Montana, and they had been neighbors to Charlie Russell. And so for their wedding present in 1903, he had given them this watercolor for a present. And this was now in 1974, and this painting was worth about, I'd say, he was asking $28,000 for the painting. So I said, well, he said, why don't you come to San Juan and look at it? I said, no, what? I said, have you ever been to Fort Worth, Texas? Back to Fort Worth. And he said, no, I haven't. I said, oh, you'll love Fort Worth. If you like the cowboys and Indians, I'll take you to the Amon Carter Museum. You bring the watercolor here, and if I like it, I'll buy it from you. If not, I'll pay your expenses. So he showed up a few days later and brought this watercolor by Charlie Russell, and it was a beauty. I loved it, but I didn't have $28,000 to buy it. So I told him, I said, here's the deal. I'm buying the painting of the watercolor from you, but everything I do, I pay in 90 days. So just count on me that I will pay you in 90 days $28,000 for this watercolor. He said, okay. So I put him back on the plane after feeding him a steak at Cattleman's Steakhouse and some calf fries and all the kind of things that you do when people come from out of town and you're entertaining them in Fort Worth. So, but all of a sudden, 90 days started passing, and I was now 60 days into this, and I had no prospects for selling this $28,000 painting. I was asking $45,000 for it. So I woke up one morning in the middle of the night, and I just sat up in bed, and I clapped my hands together, and my wife said, what's going on? I said, honey, I just sold the Russell. She said, what do you mean you just sold the Russell? It's the middle of the night. I said, I know. I just have a vision. I think God gave me this vision of where to sell this Russell. So I said, in the morning, I said, I'm gonna get up right now. I'm gonna get dressed, and I'm gonna go to the airport, and I'm gonna catch a plane for Hollywood in Beverly Hills, and I'm gonna go sell this Russell there. She said, are you crazy? I said, maybe so, but I think this is real. So I get up, I get dressed, I'm driving to the airport, and I'm calling in to leave a message at the bank with the operator that I was sick that day and would not be able to be at the bank that day. So, but as I'm calling in, they're announcing the flight, and so that's the background noise. And I thought, oh man, I've been busted. Anyway, I land in LA. I rent a wreck. They had a place there that you could rent a wreck for $5 a day, and it was just 4 tires and a steering wheel and a couple of gallons of gas. So I rented a wreck, drove into Beverly Hills, and parked the car. Got on Rodeo Drive and started walking down Rodeo Drive with this Charles Russell under my arm. I walk into a gallery, and the gallery was Peterson Gallery, and it belonged to a man named Robert Peterson, who was the owner of Hot Rod Magazine and Guns and Ammo. I didn't know it at the time. It was the first gallery that I saw, and I walked in. And the gallery director said, he likes these kind of paintings, but he's not buying anymore. So he said, but I do know a guy here in Beverly Hills that loves Charlie Russell. And he said, since I'm not going to be able to buy it from you, why don't you just go over and see if he'll buy it? So he wrote down the address, and I drove over into Hollywood and to where this a guy's name was Barney Goldberg. So I show up at the front door. I have on my 3-piece suit like a banker. And he answers the door, and here's this one-eyed, bald-headed guy with a patch on his eye and dressed like Gene Autry or Roy Rogers, with all the fringe on his shirt and white snakeskin boots with gold caps and everything. And he looked at me and he said, "Poopsie." I said, No, I'm not Poopsie. I am Ron Hall, and I'm from Fort Worth, Texas, and I'm the guy with the Russell. He said, "I know." He said, "But you're Poopsie. Come on in, Poopsie." And so I go in there, and there was another guy sitting at the table, another one-eyed art dealer sitting at the table, and these guys were having their morning Chardonnay, and they were already about half looped by the time it was before noon, and so he had this magnificent house filled with Western art, Remingtons and Russells and every kind of thing you could imagine. It looked like Ralph Lauren's ranch before Ralph Lauren was even known or popular. So, when we avoided the subject the whole time, so finally I knew I had to leave because I had a plane and to catch back to Fort Worth. And so I said, "Well, are you going to buy this Russell?" He said, No. He said, "Poopsie, it's not for me." He said, "It's it's a nice little picture, but it's not for me." He said, "You see, I have things much better than this." He said, "But I do have somebody that I'll sell it to for you."
And you probably had to drink all the Chardonnay with him for a no. But go ahead.
So he said, "I'll sell it for you and send you the money." And I said, "Oh, okay, that should be nice." So
Awesome.
I left him the thing. And I get in the car, my rent-a-wreck, I get back to the airport. And so I called my wife and I said, "I think I sold the Russell." She said, "Well, what do you mean you think you sold it?" I said, "Well, the guy's going to sell it for me. He was a nice guy I just met." She said, "Well, did you get a receipt?" And I said, "No." She said, "Do you have insurance on it?" I said, "No." She said, "Are you crazy?" I said, "Maybe." She said, "Oh my gosh, you're just risking our whole future for something that you, on this vision that you had, and with somebody you've never met, and his name is Barney Goldberg, and you called him. He said to call him Snookums, and he called you Poopsie. Go back and get the painting." I said, "I can't. I'm already getting ready to board the flight." So I flew home, and the first thing I did, she said, "Call him right now and get him to send you a receipt for the painting and make sure it's insured." Well, I called and nobody answered. Nobody answered. And then for 30 days, nobody answered his phone. My note is due. Will Crowfoot is calling me by the minute. "Where is my painting? Where is my money?" And I said, "I know I've got your painting, but the money is going to be coming on the day that it's due, and that's still a few days away." Well, I lost about 10 pounds just from my wife chewing it right out of my butt for the last 30 days. But on the 89th day, when I had to wire the money to Will Crowfoot the next day, I would dial Barney's number 10 times a day. He finally answered on the 89th day, and he said, "Hello." And I said, "Where in the hell have you been? I've been calling you for 30 days. "Poopsie," he says. He said, "I've been in Hawaii." And I said, "Hawaii?" I said, "Man, you're driving me crazy. I got to pay Will Crowfoot for this painting tomorrow." He said, "I know." He said, "Check your bank account." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Check your bank account." So I called down, and there was $45,000 in my bank account he had wired that day for the painting.
Hallelujah.
So I was saved by the bell. And so then we began what I call the Poopsie Chronicles, the marvelous adventure, because he and I then became business partners on the craziest art deals you could ever imagine, that we went all over the world. I mean, we did deals with movie stars and big fancy Hollywood homes, and it was a crazy, crazy experience.
Well, Ron, I see a lot of trust and a lot of faith in there. You say you had a vision, you've walked through it, you kind of, man, did you have to buy another fur coat and some watches on that?
No.
Okay. So, that sounded all like a movie scene, right? Mm-hmm. That if I was watching that movie, I'd be like, well, that was, they wrote that really well. It's entertaining, but there's no way it could have happened, right? So that's beautiful. And I'm sure it's going to be in the book you're writing now.
Oh, it is. I've already written the book.
Okay.
In fact, have been in discussions that people want to maybe make it into a TV series.
Yeah. So I met you after a couple of years ago, I met you, and it was after I'd already seen you in a movie about your life, portrayed by, Greg Kinnear,
Greg,
Renee Zellweger. There's a movie out there. A lot of you guys have seen it. The same kind of different as me.
That's it.
It's made about your life, another chapter of your life, besides the Poopsie Chronicles.
Well, that's true.
So
Poopsie is the prequel to Same Kind of Different as
So
Me.
basically, you've lived, say 6 or 7 decades that are movie worthy. So tell me now about the Same Kind of Different as Me.
Well,
How
Same
did that
Kind of
all
Different
come
as Me,
about?
that came about in another dream and vision. In 1998, my late wife, Debbie, had a dream about a homeless man who was she said it was like a verse in Ecclesiastes 9:15, where Solomon wrote, "There was found in the city a certain poor man who was wise, and by his wisdom the city was changed. Yet no one knew his name." She woke me up from her dream that morning, and she said, "Ron, I had the most extraordinary dream last night about this homeless man who will change our lives if we can find him. I believe my dream was from God, but I won't know unless we can go on the streets of Fort Worth and see if we can find this man." So I knew she wasn't crazy, and so I agreed. Instead of going to my art gallery or my ranch that day, I had become a rancher and had become a cowboy again, and still had my galleries in New York. I had a gallery in Santa Fe at one time. I had a gallery in Dallas, and instead of going to my gallery that day, I said, "Okay, I'll go with you to look for this homeless man." So we began walking the inner city streets of Fort Worth. We didn't find this homeless man that day, but we started volunteering. We stopped at a homeless mission and began volunteering that day. And we'd been there 2 weeks when all of a sudden, this great commotion, we were getting ready to serve an evening meal, and this man storms into the dining hall screaming at the top of his lungs, and he had on no shirt and he had on no shoes and just some raggedy old unzipped khakis. And he's screaming at the top of his lungs, "I'm going to kill whoever done it. I'm going to kill whoever stole my shoes." And he started turning over tables and throwing punches and screaming obscenities, beating up anyone he could get his hands on in the dining hall. I've never been so scared in my life. So I was behind a stainless steel serving counter. I hit the floor on my knees trying to hide and stick my head in one of those holes where the pots and pans would usually be kept. And all of a sudden, I still hear all this this pandemonium in the dining hall. And I start wondering, I wonder what happened to Debbie, because she was standing next to me. And now, of course, I have my head and I'm hiding. So I bring my head out and I see, well, she's all excited. She's jumping up and down like a cheerleader on the sideline of a football game. And she's saying, "That's him. That's him." And I say, "That's who?" She said, "That's the man I had the dream about." And by then there were probably 15 or 20 men in this brawl and fight. And I said, "Well, which one are you talking about?" She said, "The one who threatened to kill everybody."
Great.
And then she looked down at me. I'm still on my knees. And she looked down at me and pointed her finger and she said, "And Ron, I think I heard from God that you have to be his friend and find out if my dream is real." And I said, "But Debbie, I was not at that meeting you had with God. And if I want to be friends with someone who wants to kill everybody, I think I should go talk to God myself." So anyway, that's how that story got started. I had pursued this homeless man for 5 months through the inner city, almost daily until I got him in my car. And then that is the story. Same kind of different as me, which became a #1 New York Times bestseller. Stayed on the list for 3.5 years. And then I wrote the screenplay and we produced the film with Paramount. And called the same name, same kind of different as me. And it stars Renee Zellweger as my late wife. Greg Kinnear plays me. John Voight plays my father. Jaimin Hansu played my best friend, the homeless man who was known on the streets as Suicide. And so that's it. And then I've written the sequel to that book. It's called Working Our Way Home, because after my wife died, most people don't know this, but this homeless man who was bipolar, schizophrenic, ex-con, illiterate, had never been to school a day in his life, did not know how to read or write, has spent 10 years in Angola State Penitentiary in Louisiana, grew up on a plantation in Louisiana, and had been roped and dragged by the Ku Klux Klan when he was a teenager. And he was made, at that point, the Klan forced him to promise he would never again speak to a white person. So I moved this man into my home as my roommate after my wife died. So that is the greatest adventure of my life, is the 10 years before he joined my wife in heaven, of us living together as roommates. And I write about that in called Working Our Way Home. So, but this man, this schizophrenic, bipolar, crazy man, homeless man, who I moved him from a dumpster to a mansion. And he became the first person in the history of the New York Times to write a bestseller when he didn't know how to read and write. And he became a millionaire. He was honored at the White House. He became a motivational speaker where he was paid $10,000 a speech. He became an artist. He sold over 500 paintings. He gave all the money back to the homeless. And he and I traveled all across America and building homeless shelters and helped build homeless shelters. And we helped raise more than $110 million for the homeless. So it's the greatest story of transformed life, of how I say we were thrown together to save each other. I gave up everything to what I call Raise Denver. I enrolled in the University of Denver. That was his name, Denver Moore. And he taught me more about life than you could learn from 20 PhDs.
I was about to ask you. So your wife has a vision that you're going to meet this homeless guy. He's a wild,
crazy man.
He's a wild
Yeah.
man. And you, because of y'all, the God-ordained partnership, he ended up co-writing at least a book, selling paintings, becoming your best friend, living together. So we can see he benefited greatly from this divine appointment. What did you benefit however you can describe it, from the partnership, the friendship with him that was beyond material, of course?
He taught me things that you don't learn in school, because he had never been to school. And but he taught me a lot of things. He taught me that we're all homeless, just working our way home. Whether we're rich or poor or something in between, we're all just homeless.
So a profound perspective.
Yes,
None of us really own.
He was like a spiritual savant. He spoke to God every night by his dumpster, and God spoke to him and imparted him with wisdom. He's someone that, from when my wife was diagnosed with cancer, he lived by this dumpster, and for the 19 months that she lived after the diagnosis, he would stay on his knees all night long talking to God, and he would show up at our doorstep the next morning with a fresh word of wisdom, and that was relevant to our journey. And he was never wrong. And so he was like a spiritual savant. He could see around corners, and he didn't have any friends. I was his only friend.
The Lord was his portion.
Yeah.
He owned God. God owned him. He walked in the Spirit.
Yeah. He was the most extraordinary human being that I've ever met. But he never changed fundamentally. He was still, in his mind, homeless. And but he changed me dramatically. I mean, he taught me never to judge. He said, if you're going to walk these streets with me, you leave your judge's robe back home in the closet. Of course, the courthouse is full of judges, and God don't need no more of them.
That's a good one. That'll preach.
He taught me it's so much. That's what I write about in here in this book, Working Our Way Home. So this is the sequel, and then this is actually the first book, Same Kind of Different as Me, and this is the one with this is the movie version, which I tell how the movie was made. That's a whole nother book in itself of how the movie got made, and it's a great story. There's no other story like it. In fact, there are people now. I was just talking with William Morris Agency in New York this last week, who want to make this into a Broadway play. Telling the story from Denver's perspective. At the same time,
wait, can you sing and dance?
Huh?
Can you sing and dance?
Can I sing and dance? As a kid, I was in the Texas Boys Choir.
All right.
And I won a talent show at Browning Heights Elementary doing an Elvis impersonation in the 4th grade. Actually, I came in second behind Ruby Jacobs, who sang Big Bad John. And dude, I grew up listening to that song. I love that, Big Bad John. Big Bad John. But we're talking about doing a TV series of the whole story of Same Kind of Difference as Me, of back, starting with his life on the plantation and growing up just as really a slave, a modern day slave. He says he knew he wasn't owned by the man, but really the man owned him because he didn't get paid. He got credit at the man's store, and he lived in a slave cabin that had been he lived there free, and the man gave him a hog every year, and they had to just fend for themselves for the rest of the food. And whatever they worked for, the man gave them credit at the store. So it was modern day slavery.
How close to in age were you in Denver?
Denver was 7. He was about 8 years older.
Okay. So
than I am. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to ask you about this. Oh, yeah, you're working on a current project. If you want to discuss it, for housing of the homeless.
Right. Yeah.
Can we touch on that in a minute?
Yeah, we're trying to build. There are in Dallas-Fort Worth area. There are more than 20,000 people on the list for housing, for affordable housing. 5,000 of them are homeless families. And so we're trying to build, and we've pretty much, hopefully we're going to be starting here in the next month or so, to build 5,000 homes. We know we can build 1,000, but we're trying to build 5,000 smaller homes, like 1,200 to 1,500 square feet for homeless families and homeless people in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
And if I remember correctly, you're talking about building those on city-owned lots.
Well,
possibly.
There's not that we wanted to build them on city-owned lots, but there aren't that many city-owned lots that we thought there were in the beginning. So we're going to have to buy the lots, and we're looking right now for lots all over where we can build these homes. This is the same thing we're fighting. It's the no, not my neighborhood. This sounds like a great idea. Just don't put one of these houses in my neighborhood. So we have to find neighborhoods that will accept these because people don't realize 5,000 homeless families right now. There's like 700 single mothers right now that are trying to get into housing that are homeless, and this is an immediate need. And
it's beautiful that you're passionate about that. So I have 2 questions. I have to say, this has been great. Nothing lasts forever. We're on the home stretch.
Okay.
So I've got 2 questions, like 4 or 5 minutes each. Tell us, everyone, what are you passionate about now? I mean, you've already told me just the amazing projects, but if there's anything, I'd just like to hear you say it in your way. What are you most passionate about now?
Well, I'm passionate about life. I'm 76 years old, and God blessed me with a beautiful wife. I was single 11 years after Debbie went to heaven in 2000. I was single 11 years. And God gave me a beautiful new wife, and she shares my passion and vision. We have our foundation called Same Kind of Different as Me Foundation. We literally want to change the way that people view the homeless, that see the homeless. We want to give people an opportunity, the homeless, an opportunity to have a roof over their head. It has to start with something, a roof over their head. You know, if they're homeless because they don't have a place to go, and you know, but we want to incorporate a much broader thing to give them hope. You know, to build relationships, to involve communities and churches with the people, not just build a house and dump them in the house and let them fend for themselves, but to mentor them and all these things. That's kind of a legacy passion for me, because you know, my wife's final words to me when she died in 2000 were, please do not give up on Denver. God is going to bless your friendship in a way you can never imagine. And so by not giving up on Denver, by you know, having him move in with me and becoming passionate about the issues of homelessness, has driven me to do all of these things that we've done over these last 20 years now. But I'm still passionate about art. Working with a big collection in Japan. I have probably a $250 million collection of French Impressionists and Modern Masters that I have the right to sell in Japan. And so we're selectively selling those. We just sold one that was about a $20 million painting. But that's how I support myself. This homeless thing is my passion, and you might say hobby. It's what I spend a lot of time doing. But it doesn't pay any bills.
Well, it's your ministry.
It's my ministry,
really.
Yeah.
And it costs money to do ministry.
It does. It costs money to do ministries. And we have a foundation. We get a few donations a year in our Same Kind of Different as Me Foundation, which if anybody wants to check us out, it's Same Kind of Different as Me foundation.org. And we help about 1,000 people a month find shelter and that are homeless, and direct them to the shelters nearest them. And work with the homeless shelters all across America. We try to meet immediate and emergency needs for the homeless. So
I had a thought. Let me ask you about this. You know, a lot of people, there's like a great gulf between the haves and the have-nots, let's say. And so a lot of times, particularly during the holidays, a lot of people will be moved to help the homeless and donate. And there's these big rallies and all. Have you ever seen a program, maybe, I'm sure this exists, where, say, families sort of adopt a family, so to speak, where all year they're sort of connected to walk with them through the year and become friends?
We've tried that, and actually I've done that. I've had a number of homeless people that have moved in with me, and I've adopted them, and so Denver wasn't the only one. Mm-hmm. But we were asked, when the book first came out, our book, Same Kind of Different as Me, when it first came out in 2006, we were asked by the city of Atlanta, Georgia, to come and advise them on their 10-year plan to end homelessness in Atlanta. And they took us around to about 15 homeless shelters, and they had rented a man named David Smith had read our book, and he rented the Georgia World Congress Center, which is equivalent to our American Airlines Center, or larger actually. And he sold it out to hear Denver and me tell our story and raise money for the homeless. But while we were there, the mayor and city council wanted us to come advise them on what to do with their homeless situation. So we sat down at City Hall, and they told us their 10-year plan to end homelessness. And when they got through telling us this plan, my friend Denver raised his hand and he said, "Y'all mind if I ask you a question?" And they said, "Oh, no, you're exactly the person we need to hear from." And he said, "Why is it going to take y'all 10 years to solve y'all's problem here in Atlanta?" And they said, "Well, it's taken us a year to do the study, and we've spent $1 million on the study. Now that we know the problem, and we've got to buy the land, build the buildings, hire a staff, do the programs, and we hope that at the end of 10 years, there will be no homeless on the streets of Atlanta." He said, "Okay, that's true." He said, "How many homeless y'all got here in Atlanta?" And they said, "Well, we have 5,000 approximately homeless on the streets of Atlanta." He said, "Let me ask y'all another question. How many churches y'all got here in Atlanta?" And the head of the Greater Council of Churches of Atlanta said proudly, "We have more than 6,500 churches here in Atlanta. In Denver, slapped the table and said, there you go. Every church take them one. Some churches ain't getting none, but we'll take care of this problem in 30 days.
That's awesome.
And so that answers your question. Yes, we have proposed this all across America, and I've been proposing this since 2006, that churches adopt just one homeless person, and the entire body or a number of people meet the specific needs and mentor and befriend these people, find them a work, a doctor that can take care of them, a psychiatrist that can take care of them, a little garage apartment that they can live in or something. And yet I heard from just very, very few churches that ever have done that. And I've spoken over 1,000 times across America with that message.
Well, it's a beautiful message. And I think what happens is a lot of churches, their mission and their vision is they do a lot for homeless. A lot of churches really do. And a lot of other churches may not do anything at all.
Well, let me just tell you right fast, Russell, that one of the first mornings, the book, there's a profound meeting that happened here in this book that caused me to sit down on the curb with Denver, and it takes too long to tell the story. But as the first morning I sat on the curb with him by his dumpster in downtown Fort Worth, or under the underpass near there, he asked me if I was one of them Christians, and I said, yeah, I'm one of them Christians. Why do you think? I thought maybe briefly he might have seen a halo over my head or something, but he didn't. And so I said, why do you ask? He said, because there's something about you Christians that bothers all of us people here on the streets. And I said, well, what is that? He said, well, what we want to know is, why is it that all you Christians worship one homeless man on Sunday, then turn your back on the first one you see on Monday? He said, Mr. Ron, you never know whose eyes God is watching you out of, and it ain't going to be your preacher or your Sunday school teacher. He said, might be a fellow that looks like me. He said, now it ain't me, but it might be a fellow that looks like me. God's checking you out to see what kind of person that you really are.
I love it. So poetic. Obviously, Denver was a prophet.
He was.
So here's a question I ask everybody as we come to the home stretch on this time together. What about God?
Mm-hmm. Well, God is important. None of this would happen without God. This is a God story. God is an essential part of my life, and has always been. We raised our children in the church. I became a believer at age 27. And I'd been married at about 3 years, and my wife and I realized something was missing in our lives. We said, why don't we start going to church? And so we began going to church, and then somebody invited us to a Bible study, and one thing led to another, and all of a sudden we realized that maybe what we thought we had grown up with wasn't true salvation, that if we wanted to spend eternity with God in heaven, then we needed to make another decision on that. So we became believers in 1977. So
Yeah, the actual committing and entering a relationship with the living God there. Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. Well, Ron, I'm so glad that you became one of them Christians. And you know what? I see a halo on your head. I really do.
It's the lights. It's the light effect.
Oh, yeah, it could be. Well, I love the fact, I'm reminded of that scripture verse, I guess in Corinthians, where we're earthen vessels, jars of clay carrying the glory of God. And I'm sorry I never got to meet Denver, your best buddy, and I'm sure he had a lot of understanding of those kind of things. It's not about the skin,
Yeah.
It's about what's inside and the glory of God inside us.
Well, he used to say all the time, he spread a message that it's not the color of our skin or the language that we speak that divides us, it's the condition of our hearts. And he preached that message all across. You can Google Denver Moore on YouTube. You can hear him speaking. You can hear him singing. All kinds of things in there. But or you can read the book. Same kind of different as me.
Well, the movie's great. The book's probably better, and your sequel's going to supersede both of them. Your sequel is going to be awesome, and I'm praying that comes out. So hopefully this inspired people. I know this was an inspiring show to get out there and just passionately live your life. You've had a interesting life so far. I know you're not near
Still
finished.
is.
You're not near finished, of course. But anyway, thank you for coming today. And it was really cool, man, just getting to know you better and hearing some of these stories, because I know we just got a little glimpse in there.
All right.
Of some greatness.
Well, let's do something great together.
Yes, sir.
Make a difference.
And we certainly will. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We'll see you on the next episode with some more cool stuff going on. So peace out.